This episode of Twin Cities Trekkies is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor before, let me explain. First of all, it's free. There are creation tools that help you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership required. They'll also help you to distribute your podcast so it can be heard on many different platforms, such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's all you need in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, everyone. Welcome to episode 27 of Twin Cities Trekkies. I am Wes.
And I'm Kenzie.
And today we have a very special guest hailing all the way from Germany. We have planetary geoscientist Dr. Birko Katarina Rusica talking about Star Trek metrics. This was actually something that Kenzie had shared with me personally, talking about metrics regarding dialogue in Star Trek and also episodes of Star Trek Voyager too. So I thought this was very interesting. So what I had done, I read the articles. I thought it was interesting. So I reached out to Dr. Birko and stuff like that. And here we are. So to get in touch with us, it is simple. Simply email us at tctrekkiespodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to send us an email. Anything you like to say is perfectly fine with us and stuff like that. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. The handle is tctrekkiespodcast for both social media platforms. We're also available on YouTube. You can find us on YouTube. Twin Cities Trekkies is pretty easy to find and stuff like that. Other things like that. We are also available on every platform you can think of, like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and stuff like that. And also, I do want to shout this out to anybody who has a podcast of their own. Feel free to send us a 60-second promo of your podcast. Genre of podcast is not required. Send us an email with your promo. If you have a future episode that you are really thinking that, oh, this would be great to be promoted on Twin Cities Trekkies, feel free to do that. But just keep in mind that any feedback you do leave, vocal or written, may be featured in a future episode of Twin Cities Trekkies.
Hi, I'm Karina Gantas, host of Behind the Pen podcast. Anyone who works with a pen can be a guest. I've had film and movie stars on the show, award-winning directors, authors, musicians from all over the world. You can find Behind the Pen on my YouTube show under my channel, Karina Gantas, and you can find the audio podcast on Anchor or look for Behind the Pen on Spotify, Google Play, and all the other great podcast platforms. I know nothing about my guest, so as we chat, we soon learn who is behind the pen.
Now on to some introductions.
All right. Well, hailing all the way from Germany, we have planetary geoscientist Dr. Birko Katarina Rusica. So welcome to Twin Cities Trekkies.
Thanks for having me.
All
Yeah, it's
right.
super exciting.
It's so exciting to actually meet you and stuff like that because I mean it's been what 2 weeks since Kenzie had shared those articles with me, and I was like, I am really quite surprised. First of all, that when I reached out to you, you responded almost immediately. I just want to.
Yeah, I was super pumped. How I actually discovered some of your work was everyone's getting really excited about it. Like the analysis of it was in a there's like a Star Trek like wholesome posting and like Star Trek shit posting like Facebook groups and but people
Oh,
shared
really?
it being like, hey, have you seen stuff like this? Like this is really cool. And someone's doing like data analysis. And then I saw it shared again in a feminist Trek group that I was in. And I'm like, wow, I'm like, I want to reach out and talk to this person because it's really cool to see somebody kind of do a data analysis of something that you don't usually think about over the period of time that Star Trek has been around. But realizing that that's a great way to kind of have like this milestone indicator of how far have we come. So if you want to introduce yourself and kind of
Yeah,
talk about some of the stuff that you've done and like maybe some inspiration around that, like what kind of just jump out of there.
Yeah, sure, of course. So I find that fascinating what you just said. Of course, I could track pretty well how my tweet was doing, where I was giving out the links and the graphics and the info about my results. And I was super excited to see just how that took off. But of course, I expected it to somehow leave Twitter, but I don't have any way to track that. So
Yeah.
that's a really cool insight for me, on the other hand. I had a feeling like Star Trek and gender and data science, that's something that many people would get excited about. And so thanks for the introduction, Wes. I'm a planetary geoscientist, which means that I do geoscience, like geology or geophysics or anything related to solid Earth, except that I focus mainly on other bodies than Earth. So for my PhD project, I was lucky enough to be able to work with the data from the Rosetta mission. So this was a European science space mission to Comet 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko, and there was such a wealth of data, and I was on board for analyzing the images. So there were about 70,000 images taken of the surface of this comet, and my job was to see if I could reconstruct the geology, the internal structure of this comet, just from the three-dimensional model and the images taken off the surface. And we got some pretty cool results, and so that's what I do for
Super
my
exciting.
in civilian life. And there was some time on my hands due to some pandemic happening in this world.
Oh yeah.
So I took the time to learn data science, and I was just, taking classes, learning a lot of things. It was very theoretical, and I thought I needed a practice project. I needed to get my hands dirty and just really do something about this. And I was browsing Kaggle, it's like a website where people can upload a lot of data sets, and you can do with them whatever you like. There's also competitions, but
yeah.
I found a couple of really cool things there. I was just browsing, and I saw that somebody did an analysis for the transcripts of Stargate SG-1. It was really in-depth and extensive, and I was really impressed and intimidated. But, only for a second. And I thought, hey, why not? And I looked what other transcripts there might be. And then there was one for Star Trek. And I thought, hey, my time has come.
Oh, that's so awesome. You're like, here we go.
Being a lifelong Trekkie, I just couldn't resist. And then within moments, I realized what I had gotten myself into. And this has taken up the past 3 months of my life. Every free minute has gone into this. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So you are a Trekkie there, Björko?
Oh, absolutely. I grew up with Next Generation and Voyager.
Yeah.
Sounds
And
like very much like
that was
Kenzie there.
absolutely what inspired me to become a scientist.
Oh, awesome.
Yes, that's it.
Absolutely.
That is same for me. Like growing up watching Star Trek, that is exactly how I felt. I wanted to go into physics and into computer
Mm.
science, being like, this is such a central part of Star Trek, and seeing women engineers is very exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome because it sounds just like Kenzie there. Just like grew up on Voyager and Next Generation and stuff like that. Kind of sounds just like Kenzie. So that's
Yeah, we
awesome.
always ask like, what's your favorite Star Trek series if you can pick? And for me, mine's Voyager. I love Voyager. That's definitely my favorite. 'Cause I love Captain Janeway.
Yeah. It's hard to pick a favorite.
I know
all
it's
of
tough.
them, all of them have issues. All of them have strength. Voyager is very dear to my heart, just because I watched it in such a formative time of my youth, and just when Voyager was airing, it wasn't very common to see a leading woman, a woman in command of anything, and just seeing Janeway week after week and having it be so normalized for me kind of normalized the concept for me too, that I could do great things.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So so you said you found the like the metric kind of thing and stuff like that. And you saw one for Star Trek. So what prompted you to start doing the metrics of Voyager and of the genders of Star Trek?
So two things really. On the one hand, I am being a scientist. I always just want to know how things work. And I love digging below the surface. I love seeing what's behind the obvious and just revealing new layers to things, and to be very abstract. And to be a little less abstract, on the other hand, I love having hard data to support something that we intuitively think is true, but then there's always a couple of people who go like, nah, that's not true. Your impression is wrong. Then you can be like, hey, here's my graph, here's my data. I have it very black on white, or in my case, neon on black.
Oh, I loved all
the
styles of the like the different style palettes that you used for some of your visualizations.
It was, to be very precise, what inspired me to do the gender study was something that I had read a couple of weeks before, where it said that, and don't quote me on the numbers, but that a medium is perceived to be gender equal as soon as women talk, I think 30% of the time. And anything more than 30%-ish is perceived to be the women are talking too much.
Yeah, I saw a similar study to that where it was going by asking men and women to look at dialogue and their perceptions, and then men usually came back almost always thinking women talked more than the men, but then the women had the more accurate perception of women talking less than the men. And then the supporting actual dialogue, doing something probably similar to what you did, finding a data set around dialogue, being like, actually, the women we're talking about 15-20% of the time, it's just somehow weirdly overperceived. I don't know, for whatever reason, it's overperceived very easily, specifically by women or by men, which I think is such a weird thing. I don't even know how that works or what all goes into that kind of perception, but having something like raw data to work with and tell a story with is always amazing. And I think it's so important in this day and age where so many people can be their own kind of informants on the internet. They can look up things and research, but having the ability to put something into a data visualization, which really can visually tell a story, which I think a lot of people need, that's super nice. And I love how you laid out your GitHub projects, where you really broke down all of the data that you were, scrubbing and cleaning and going through and comparing it. And that's super nice, like before you see the final visualization.
Yeah, it was really important to me that people could follow along, that it was understandable and reproducible. And I've had a couple of people actually reach out to me saying they reproduced my data, or they worked from where I stopped, and I was extremely excited to see their projects. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. I don't know what else to
I that was something where I was like, I really want to look into this. Some of the tools that you had used. So my senior year of college, I tried to do a sort of a marriage of data visualization with computer science as my like final project, like just talking about a way to visualize. I was specifically focused on things like JSON, like being a nice in between tool of passing data for things like R for like data sets and doing the visualization tools. And so it's really exciting to see that where I'm like, wow, I'm like, I think you rekindled my like excitement about working on data visualizations, because it is like, yeah, like I mean, I think that's safe to say for other people that probably reach out to you, like something that you definitely kindled in others being like, wow, I can do this too. And just seeing it broken down, I think is really inspiring and just really nice to be able to follow along and actually try it out themselves. Like it's not so intimidating when you can see people doing really honest work and trying something out.
It's my deepest conviction that science should never be intimidating. And
exactly.
I hate this trend in academia in particular, where it's mostly about how smart can I sound? How impressive can I sound? Which, having visited a couple of conferences, is very frequently happening through how much can I just make people feel stupid because they don't understand what I'm telling them, but making my audience doubt themselves instead of having them take me to
Exactly. I totally agree with that too. One of my favorite, like probably one of my biggest idols in science was Richard Feynman, because he was huge on simplifying things and also willing to be wrong and failing. You have to fail gracefully. Like it's all about being wrong. Like if you truly are a scientist and you love what you do, part of being a scientist is being wrong most of the time, and you have to be okay with that.
You're wrong.
Part of it is sitting with why you're wrong and how can you be right then, and learn from that. It's all about learning from failure, and
it's failing upwards. I couldn't agree more. And this whole atmosphere of do not fail is so counterproductive. It's not helping. So what I set out to do is, I really love science communication. I really love communicating and bringing not only my results, but science in general to the public mostly, because with the public, you still get this moment of, wow, that's so cool. And what better thing is there to do?
Yeah. And I think now more than ever, we need things like that. Like, especially where people right now, especially during the pandemic, are doing a lot of their own research or using the internet as a means to find out information. And it's people who are willing to dive into data, especially raw data, and tell an honest story about it, and not be, that's one thing about raw data that can be a little scary too, is like misrepresenting what the story is being told with it. But like for the most part, people who actually work with data sets and set that up, the intentions are true there, and they want to tell a story that's meaningful to people and understandable. And
I was actually very grateful to the people who came forward and pointed out some errors I had left in my data set that I uploaded. And that's great. I'm happy for people to reach out, because that gives me a chance to fix it. Otherwise, the errors will just stay in there and people will download it. Like, heavens forbid some undergrad Trekkie wants to do this and get super frustrated because they run into an error early on and then they never work with the data. That would be such a shame.
It's about failing gracefully. I love when people tell me that I'm wrong, because then it gives a conversation to open up of like, so what can I do better? And that's kind of like, I guess my life's motto is I just always want to be doing better, but without failing, and having moments where I'm told that I'm wrong or that I could do something a little more correctly, then you don't really get to become better. So That's kind of my standard of like, no, like I will say something, and if it is wrong, correct me, and fail gracefully about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's this is all fascinating to me. Granted, I'm not a what's describe it? I'm not a sciencey type person. I'm more of like a hardcore communicator, I should say. Because I enjoy science. I mean, I enjoy the science on Star Trek. I enjoy the science on anywhere. Like this was fascinating to me. Like, I mean, when I read it, I mean, granted, I didn't understand half of it because that's just me. It's just I didn't get any formal training of how to interpret it. Uh, so, but I thought it was still cool, because I know this was a passion project for Kenzie, kind of thing, because she did this kind of thing in her college years. So I was like, okay, but
And also just exciting to see a fellow like woman in science. Like I think probably my like quickest way to be excited is just to meet fellow women in the science world. And especially when it's like an inspiration verted similar to mine of like, oh my gosh, Star Trek. Heck yeah, like same. That's exactly where I felt a lot of my inspiration growing up, of being like seeing Star Trek and seeing this future where it doesn't matter who you are, you can, work for the better good through like the story that's being told. And I always thought that was super exciting when like I want to live in a world where I'm not judged for like being a woman, but it's inevitably becomes kind of intertwined with your whole identity anyway. But I think it's important to note it and then, do something about it, or just explain what you see around being a woman in science or being a woman in Star Trek.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's see here. I can't really think of any other things to ask
Gotta
you.
go through some.
You know what I was most excited about to come out of this project is the reaction that I got from people on Twitter. And once again, I have no idea what the people are talking about on other platforms. I only see what's happening on Twitter.
I know it's a kind of a weird social thing of like between like I don't use Twitter as much, but I have a lot of people my age that use Twitter. I tend to use Facebook a lot, which I don't know, like that's actually kind of more of an outlier here with our age group, which always feels really weird. But most people I know, especially outside of the United States, do not use Facebook. So it's like Twitter is the more common thing. So it is interesting to hear that, like, but yeah. Keep going about Twitter.
On Twitter, the reactions were, first of all, I was extremely shocked by the ratio of positive to negative feedback. Having, talking about something like Star Trek that has a surprising amount of male fans, and the topic being about gender, and kind of like I try to keep it as factual as possible, but the graphic kind of says that there is a gender imbalance in the beginning and then it gets better. I expected there to be a bit of a mess, but there wasn't. Like the number of people who were absolute people about this was very low, and I got so much positive feedback. I got so much excited people, and what really, really made me the happiest was I got so many people saying, this is great, you should do, or somebody should do this and this and this next. All of these ideas just bubbling out of people. It was the Twitter comments were like a brainstorming session. And the reason I'm so excited about this is I'm a geoscientist. I am not a gender studies major at all. I mean, I'm a woman living in this world and I have open eyes, so I see what's going on, but I am by no means, like, I couldn't write this up into what does this mean? What societal developments influenced this? Was it a change in gender in the writer's room? Was it, what all the contributing factors? I couldn't possibly have an educated thing to say about this, but I bet there are people out there who are Trekkies and who are gender study majors. So if anybody feels really inspired by this and wants to work from this, please get in touch. I would absolutely love to collaborate on this. Like a couple of people reached out to me and said, like, you should publish this. And I am like, yeah, sure, right away. But I
It
would
would be
be
cool to see
like
where it
really
goes.
out of my depth to publish a gender studies article as a geoscientist.
Yeah. I
So
mean, it is super cool to see that though, because you've contributed inevitably to that conversation just by telling that story. Now people can ask those questions now that they see the data and it's visualized, and you see that
yeah,
there is a trend of it becoming more equal in the later series. That is something where now people can tell a story beyond that of like, is it because of writer changes? Is it by producer changes? Can we go and look up that information? Which people
mm,
totally can, being like, there actually have been more women writers, or there have been changes in
yeah.
producers, or how many
So
people write
much can and
episodes.
should be said about this, and this is such a wealth of like. I I keep thinking this is a great bachelor's thesis.
Yeah,
Scientists should look into this,
I
but
know this
I
is like,
thankfully
it's
don't
like an
have the time or
amazing,
the expertise.
yeah, it's awesome. And I like seeing it because especially since it is a trend towards being more of an equal representation. And that's what's exciting to me because it gives me hope that we're heading in the right direction and that people's voices are heard and that things are written for today's audience. You know, like I think that's just like a huge thing
Mm,
that you can see that over time here in the graphs that you've made, and you can see that progress. And I think that's what is a really awesome story to be like, hey, progress is being made. And like, I think that's super fun to actually see a visualization of them being like, it'd be interesting to see across the board on other things. Like, is this a trend specifically in sci-fi? Is it across the board of all genres of television? Like being able to see that, is that something that's becoming normalized across society to have women speak more on screen?
isn't this fascinating though? I mean, it would be so cool if we could just study that without sinking massive numbers of working hours, because as far as I know, there is no catalog, no database of TV or movie characters and their gender. So what took up so much time is I was going through every single episode of Star Trek and assigning the genders to the characters. Like I was going by memory, of course. I was using Memory Alpha. I was using Wikipedia. In some cases, I pulled up the episode on Netflix and checked the scene because I just wanted to be sure. Like, you can't tell from the names in the transcript. You absolutely cannot tell the gender with all of these made up alien names.
Well, that's
You
what I
just
was going
cannot
to ask.
tell.
So when I was going through some of your code, like looking at some of the Python stuff that you've written, I was like, I was wondering, like you had a little thing, doing a group by gender, like getting that all set up. But I was like going to ask about that, like how did you get the gender in the first place? So you just went through and like manually by memory did that?
Absolutely. And I
Oh
started
man, that's intense.
chronologically. So I started with the original series, and at some point, very quickly, I realized that this is not doable because there was something like 490 something. I don't remember the exact
Oh
number,
yeah.
but they were like on the order of 400 characters in the original series alone, and that's only 3 seasons. So I felt a daunting task coming towards me with the 7 season shows like Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and I was like, okay, this is what am I doing? So at some point I realized um, I need to make a cutoff point, and I arbitrarily decided that I only count characters that have at least 10 lines of dialogue in an episode.
Yeah,
Of course,
I
I'm
really
losing
like
some data, but not much.
the location. Sounds like very nice. Like, most talkative characters, and then going from that.
Yeah.
That's a smart way to do it though, because I think that's another thing that can get very intimidating with studying stuff like this. Would be like, how many characters are we going to look at? Is it minor characters versus major characters, or is it a mixture of both? Which in your case, you did just most talkative characters, and then just base it off of that instead of being like major characters. Like you could break it down of like who spoke the most out of the captains or things like that. Which I think in yours you said that Janeway had the most lines overall as captains going.
Not quite, but she's pretty well up there with Picard. I think Picard has
Oh
the
yeah,
most
I think I was
lines.
trying to look at where Picard
He
was.
just loves his monologues. Yeah.
Oh yeah, this was just an example. Yeah, I just saw that compared to TOS and Voyager, that Janeway spoke more than Kirk, which I was surprised by. I was like, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. And then there's a couple of characters, one thing that made me really happy was all of the feedback I got from people questioning my methods, because you should do that. You should always question people's methods. And the most asked question was people who clearly didn't have the mental space or the time or whatever to read the whole thing, which is perfectly fine. And then they came to me and said, like, how did you gender people? How did you do this? What about gender neutral characters? The sheer number of times I was asked in varying degrees of politeness, what about the gender neutral characters, or the non-binary, I should say, non-binary characters. It's just refreshing that so many people care about this. And I wish that it was enough of a topic in Star Trek to actually include it in this graph, but it would have made the visualization more messy. I have all of the data. The data is in my GitHub repository. It's all there, publicly available. It's just that it's not much. The non-binary characters
in the comparison
are less
of those two, you'd have to like isolate that
5%. Yeah, but it's a steep upwards trend with a non-binary main character in Discovery.
Something
is happening
with Adira. Yes. That's what I was thinking. Like, we have our first non-binary actor playing a non-binary character. So that makes total sense. Yeah, now you see more of an uptick now, especially when season 4 starts. It'll keep on going up with your data. So at least, but yeah, this is all fascinating to me. Like, granted, this is sometimes a little over my head, but I don't mind that. I mean, I don't mind being like, I know what you said earlier about, being like, you want to sound sophisticated but not sound like everyone else is stupid. But for me, it's just like, I know it's way over my head, but this is so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So I mean, as long as I'm fascinated by this, like, which it was, and that's why I reached out to you, that's a win in my book. So.
And I'm super happy to hear that the Star Trek community embraced your findings. That's something that I'm happy to hear about. Like, I was we had an episode probably near the beginning of this podcast kind of talking about the Star Trek community and its history of, like, especially with gatekeeping, or kind of playing this game of like, you don't deserve to be a Star Trek fan because you don't know the following things, or you don't know, you're not well versed or informed in certain episodes, or just like whatever trivial factors that people play into deciding whether or not you get to be considered a fan. And I've always had that's always been a very interesting topic for me, because I've met that just being born as a woman and liking sci-fi. I feel like it often comes up where people question, like, oh, do you really like Star Trek, or you don't look like a Star Trek fan, or whatever that means. Like, just those conversations, and how does that change over time? I think seeing stuff like this also drives a lot of that, like how much more open communities of like fandoms, especially Star Trek, have become, where I don't have as many people being stereotypical about what does a Star Trek fan look like, or like, do you deserve to be a fan of Star Trek? I think anybody that likes Star Trek can like Star Trek, whether or not they can list off episodes, or if they can remember a character. It's all about impact. And if you've enjoyed, watching it and you like the show, then you're a Star Trek fan.
Yeah. I fully agree with you. That's one of the best things, one of the really good things about the Star Trek community. Looking back, I shudder to think a little bit if I had attempted to do the same thing in another fandom. I'm not going to name any names, but some fandoms come to mind that would have not been as welcoming.
Yeah.
And in the same vein, as a scientist, I don't see the value in mocking people for not knowing things. Most of us don't know most of the things. And you know what kind of is my motto a little bit is this. I don't know if you've know this XKCD comic about if you don't know something and you hear about it for the first time, you're among today's lucky 10,000 who hear it for the first time. Isn't that exciting? You learn about it now. And I've been perceiving this in the Star Trek fandom when, you know, I didn't watch a couple of seasons of Next Generation. I somehow skipped it when it first came out. And it could have been the reaction of, oh, you're not a Star Trek fan. You've never even seen the whole Next Generation. But instead it was like, oh, you're in for a treat. Here's a lot of great things you're going to see for the first time. I wish I could see it for the first time again. And that's the mindset I feel like we should really adopt in science too.
Yes, I love that intention when meeting people with information they don't know yet. I've never been a fan of the like, you don't know this, like type of feeling when people go like, oh, pshaw, like I can't believe that you would know this type of feeling, but more like, oh man, you don't know this. This is so exciting. Like you're in for a treat. I love that because it just shows that people are excited that you too get to learn something and you get to pass knowledge to somebody. I think that's a great way to keep people excited about learning rather than intimidating. Because I think a lot of people, when there's so much information around us all the time, worry about coming into a conversation where they don't know something and are afraid that people are going to find out that they don't know enough about it. So they try, like what you were talking about earlier, trying to sound super sophisticated enough to like bolster themselves and keep away any feelings of like that they're not well versed or know enough about something. But it's nice to just be able to be freely speak about your experience and your knowledge. And if you have gaps or things that are missing that people are like, oh, you don't know that, like that it's treated as an opportunity rather than some sort of issue in your knowledge.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's really. I'm glad that the Star Trek fandom has embraced what you're saying, Birko. Birko. I'm glad that they have embraced this because I mean, you can definitely say them. I probably would have suggested like Doctor Who or Star Wars for sure. They would have probably not. They probably would have crucified you. But.
But it's tough, and it is tough. Like that's kind of the perception. Like when I was growing up, I actually kind of had that perception about Star Trek. At least some fans that I knew growing up, I was almost worried sometimes saying that I was a Star Trek fan because I had known really hardcore Star Trek fans, and it sometimes made me nervous to say me too. And then it'd be met with this like, oh yeah, tell me everything there is to know about Star Trek and prove it. And it's like, I shouldn't have to do that. I just like Star Trek. Like my friend that has watched one episode of Voyager and she liked it is a Star Trek fan. Me's watched however many series and episodes. I'm a Star Trek fan. There's no difference between us. Mm-hmm. Just the opportunities to experience more of it. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was really careful to phrase it like thinking a lot about how I would phrase the tweet when I put it out, because I had a little bit of a gut feeling that this would be taken off, perhaps, hopefully. And, there's a couple of ways I could have presented the information with, starting with some conclusions. But along the lines of, to boldly go where men finally shut up. I could have phrased it like that, and then I would not have seen the end of it, and it would also not have helped. It would not have created an environment where people go like, oh cool. It was really important to me to present what I found and present it in a way that said like, hey, let's talk about this. Isn't this exciting?
Yeah.
Like, look how far we've come. And then so many people comment on Voyager being a real high point in the curve, and yet still the dialogue being significantly less for the women than for the men. So the perception was very different from the data that I found, where it's a show with a female captain, of course. And then there was Seven of Nine and Balana and whatnot. And of course, there were more dialogue lines said by women than by men, except no, it wasn't. And, this is the kind of thing that we should talk about. It's just
that was the
really
thing that was
exciting.
The moment that I saw this data, that was the first thing I wanted to look at was Voyager, because in my head, my hypothesis was that that's going to be a big uptick, I bet, because of how many, like, I'm having a major female characters as well as minor characters that were women. But then seeing that, it didn't really shift that much, did it? Like, it's still, trending up, but still there's a lot more male dialogue, which I, in my own head, then was like, wow, I guess in my head, I always pictured there's so much more dialogue than the other way around. So it's exciting to kind of see that and be like, okay, that's cool. It's telling its story. Like, that's the whole point, to open that conversation of like, it might seem like that, but actually the data says otherwise. So I applaud you for thinking really critically about how you phrase sharing findings. So I think that's another huge place, like, that's like an opportunity in a world full of information like today's, how we present information. Because it's easy to see something like this and be like, yeah, that's pretty shitty, like, to see the past, but also like you see progress, and it depends on what you're focusing on and how you're going to frame that and present that to people. That can totally change how people perceive it.
Yeah, but I would like to object to phrasing it as the past was shitty. I mean, those were just different times. We shouldn't look at them through 2021 goggles too much.
It's a sign of the times. Yeah, that's like more just me like joking about it. Like, I see that a lot, where people will try to like say things like that about past like movies, like the topics that movies cover, conversations that happen, how characters are written. But it is like that thing of like, but remember, it's a sign of the times. Like, you can't like, it's often this like culture around looking back at things in retrospect and kind of judging it in today's standards. And it's like, it's good to have that reflection, but you can't throw away something of the past because of what it was, as it was in that time, which was normal. Like, it'd be easy to say like, screw the original series because of whatever data showing that for some reason, like, however,
there's other reasons to say that.
Yeah, like, but seeing that, but also remembering that it's like, okay, but also for the time, like, this was actually very almost controversial, a lot of the things that they covered, or things that were trying to be forward thinking in that time. And you have to remember like periods of time and when things were produced, to remember that, because it'd be easy to look back now and be like, oh wow, I can't believe they do that. And it's like, well, actually, if you know more about that time period, it is believable. Actually, almost surprising that they did do that, considering the times.
Mm-hmm.
I had a good chuckle about somebody who came up to me on Twitter and was like, keep your gender politics outside of my Star Trek. And I'm like, how do I tell you
how intertwined this actually is with Star Trek?
Keep politics out of science fiction is so hilarious to me.
I know. I'm like, that's literally like, those are intertwined inexorably. Like, that's kind of the point of sci-fi, especially, I mean, like, a lot of people writing stories of sci-fi, it sort of is this analysis of future society or past society, just on like the decisions.
Science fiction has always looked critically at where we are and tried to imagine a world where we're one step further.
Yeah. And so that is an interesting feedback for somebody to try to bring up. I'm like, I'll have to disagree.
And a step further for our eyes is not necessarily the same direction that a step further was for 1966 TOS.
Yeah.
I mean, for them, a step forward was the women wearing very short skirts. Then you look at Discovery today, and the only short skirts you see more or less are on the men. I mean, the women are fully dressed again, because today that's a step forward to that women don't need to be sexualized anymore. It changes so much.
Yeah, and that's such an exciting thing to see, and it's interesting to have conversations around that. And do the comparison. So again, I love that you span this whole time period. It's a perfect amount of time to also just look at how things have changed over the past 60 years. And I think that's just a great way to start conversations like this. And we're already starting so many conversations about this. I can't imagine like how long people could just sit and talk about things that they wonder
Yeah.
about based on this data.
So I would like to shamelessly promote this one more time, that if one of your
Oh, yes.
listeners has any interest or expertise in looking at this through gender goggles, I would be delighted to pick this up again. Like, I could help out with the data analysis of any kind of way, but there should be a lot of talk.
Yes.
Yes.
Totally agree with that.
Totally agree with this 100%. Because we got we like regarding gender stuff, we do always do the I know like I know I took a gender studies class in college, and talked about the Bechdel test and stuff like that, and stuff like that. I know Discovery passes it every time because of because of the main star, because of more of Sonequa Martin Green and stuff like that, and other things like that. But yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
I think the other one too, like I love that you did IMDb ratings as well for, like, that's another great visualization for Star Trek Voyager. Just like another visualization of that. So that'll be definitely something when we share this episode, we like throw out that GitHub project and be like, take a look at these. It's pretty interesting. And the way that you outlined it, I think anybody can pick it up and go have a run at it themselves.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought this was, like I said before, like, I'll reiterate one more time, is like all this data was a little bit over my head, but it makes. I mean, I got the gist of it, but the intricacies and stuff like that, that was a little bit over my head. But because like I said, I don't have no formal training in data analytics. But it was definitely a great thing to look at and stuff like that. And I'm glad that it's getting more equal now, thanks to. And I think we should all thank Alex Kurtzman for that. Being
Oh, yeah. Totally.
the head guru of Star Trek, which I'm gonna like shamelessly put this out. He just got extended for another 3 years on his contract,
Yes.
so he's there till at least 2027. So
That's a relief.
doing Star Trek. Just shamelessly pointing that out right now. So yeah, definitely we'll definitely be seeing more of an equality in terms of dialogue for genders and stuff like
I
that.
thought, yeah, and I look forward to just seeing I would love if anybody knows about more of the backstory of how like production goes and what conversations are like on how they write series. I would love to know more about that, because I feel like that's a huge part of it. Obviously, is just how they decide to pick writers. How are they being critical with themselves? It's like, do we need more representation in one way? How are they collecting feedback about dialogue and character representation? Like, I always think that's amazing, and I'm sure they do a lot of that, because it seems like they're obviously listening to some sort of feedback or some sort of source that is telling them like changes need to be made, and they're moving forward with them. And I love that. I think that's exciting, and I love seeing people collaborating and listening to others. It's great. It's like the true world of science and communication being tied together, as Star Trek should be. It feels like we're approaching what Star Trek is painting a future of us doing. And I'm like, hey, we're starting to almost like live like the hope that we can reach a society similar to what's portrayed in Star Trek. And that's exciting to me.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting. I think, like I said, I think since Alex Kurtzman's been the head guru of Star Trek since 2017, I think with production wise, they've hired a lot more female writers and female directors and producers. I mean, you got Hanelle Culpepper, for example. I can just bring this up. Hanelle Culpepper. She was the first woman of color to direct an episode of Star Trek. So, yeah. So I think Alex Kurtzman is maybe the reason why. I think they're getting more equal. So I could be wrong about that, but I don't know. Maybe I know
That's the
once.
opportunity. Then, like, someone pick up Birko's work and let's run with it and analyze it more. Keep it, keep analyzing and checking more behind the curtains of like, why is this? Why
Yeah.
is this a thing?
There's so much more that could be done just with the data set that I cleaned and prepared. Like the original data that I found to work with wasn't, I noticed that it had some issues. So I set about building it back up from scratch. So now there's on my GitHub, there's available the data set of all transcripts of all series of Star Trek until 2020, I think. And just so many ideas what could be done with them. Right now, I just looked at the character names and counted, like I counted characters, I counted what they said, but the dialogue is all there. You could
Yeah.
totally do like a sentiment analysis. Who says more positive things? Who says more negative things? Is there a trend? What topics are you talking about? Like I did a quick and dirty analysis just for fun, and I found out that obviously there is more mentions of coffee in Voyager than in any other season. But I mean, these kind of things are just really, really interesting. Like, did you know, for example, that coffee is mentioned more in general than tea, for example, but in Next Generation, of course, tea is mentioned about 5 times as often as coffee, whereas in Voyager, coffee is mentioned about 4 times as much as tea. These are the kinds of analysis you could do, and I mean, obviously, beverage is not a very interesting thing. You could look at something like emotions, topics like war or weaponry or peace talks, or all kinds of content analysis.
How many human-centric references are made throughout Star Trek?
And then there is the whole analysis for human versus alien. And, there's like, so
there's
much
there's a lot of human cultural references above, like, I mean, obviously that's like the storytelling and story writing in general. Like, I don't know how much people want to get into building a whole backstory of an alien race and how much they reference stuff, but things like coffee and tea, like those are pretty, like, I haven't heard other like necessarily versions of like what they're talking about being like a human thing, or references to like Shakespeare or like classic works of literature that are human related. And it's like, is that common knowledge among the Federation? Like everybody knows that magically?
Yeah, because this is like a really neat shorthand to do an analysis of a visual medium when you have the transcripts of what's being said. Obviously, we still don't have the data on what is being shown. How do the characters behave visually? That's not in there, obviously, but the dialogue already has so much information, and with data science, that's the beauty of it. Once you have the script set up, it doesn't take very long. You can just have it run, like looking for all instances of tea or Earl Grey. It takes seconds.
Yeah, let the code. Once you have it set up, let the code do it. That's like the best thing, is just find it, group by it, do it, give me the results.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, I would love to take a stab at it, and if I do, I will definitely be sending it your way and being like, what do you think? What about this? Like, and I hope that you get a lot of people doing that already, or having conversations about doing that. And I think honestly that it's probably inspired a ton of people, just like the sentiment I saw. And that's why in the first place I wanted to reach out and talk about this, was like I just kept seeing it popping up, and I'm like, this is so cool, and I'm excited to see how many people are excited about this, and people having ideas, and I'm like, I hope those ideas actually become actions that people take to like do that themselves or look at it too. So I look forward to hearing more of that, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch or follow each other. I'll make sure to creep on the Twitter and look, because I'm definitely more of a lurker on Twitter. I should use Twitter more, considering like that it's a pretty nice medium for most people for social media, but just got to get into it. I got to find my voice in Twitter.
Yeah.
You got this.
Okay. I think we're reaching the end of this conversation, I think. Where can how can they contact you, Birko?
So I would actually prefer if people reach out to me via Twitter. If they don't have Twitter, that's okay too. There's a contact form on my homepage. I'm sure you'll include the links in the show notes. So
definitely.
What's the Twitter handle?
Oh, the Twitter handle is @letsboldlygo.
Nice.
With underscores between the words.
Love it.
Oh, that's awesome. Granted, I bet you after this episode is available, you'll probably get a lot more followers, I hope.
Exciting.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I really did have really interesting conversation. We'll definitely keep in touch if we have to do this again.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yes, a pleasure having you.
All right, so until next week, take care and live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.